to the first regular episode of Apollo Papyrus under its new name. I'm the host of Apollo Papyrus, Aaron Apollo Camp. The interview guest for this episode was the only female religious studies major at her college at the time she attended, is the author of a children's book, Scottosaurus The Little Dinosaur, is the author of a novel, The Space Between Time, writes the blog Sage Woman Chronicles, and is a fellow podcaster. If you guessed Lucinda Sage-Midgorden, you're correct, and here's my interview of Lucinda. Lucinda Sage-Midgorden, welcome to Apollo Papyrus.
Thank you. I'm so impressed you said my name right.
Feel free to introduce yourself to our listeners.
Oh my goodness. Well, okay. I am a 70-year-old woman, retired from teaching, from years and years of teaching theater mostly, although I did teach English for a while as well. And my background is in theater. I've done acting, directing, stage managing, all the backstage things, not creating, but sewing costumes and making sets and things like that. And since about 2008, I retired from full-time teaching and started teaching part-time at the college, my local community college. And in 2020, when everybody was locked down and we were teaching over Zoom, I decided to follow my dream and start a podcast, Story Power. Now, I had already written a novel and published it independently. It's called The Space Between Time. And then I had also started a blog in 2013. But the podcast is the thing that I really love the most. So that's a really quickie introduction of myself.
An interesting fact about you is that you attended a Christian college and you were the only female religious studies major at the college at the time you attended. What was that like?
I try not to remember those days. I loved the classes. However, at every meal in the Commons, I was accosted by young men carrying their Bibles and telling me that I needed to change my major and that women were supposed to be quiet and, blah, 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 blah. So, of course, I was not taking religious studies in preparation to be a minister because women were not ordained ministers in the church that I belonged to at that time. Interestingly enough, about 5 to 7 years after I graduated, that changed and women were allowed to be ordained ministers. We had what's called a lay ministry. But I was taking religious studies because I love stories. I grew up, we watched television shows and movies and discussed them growing up. And so to me, the Bible was all about all these stories of people and their encounters with God and their encounters with each other and with different cultures. And that's what I was interested in. So, after I don't even remember how long it was that these guys would stop me at every meal, interrupting my meal and telling me that I needed to change my major. But eventually they got it that they were not going to win, that I was not going to change my major. And I ended up graduating in 1979 with my religious studies degree.
Without spoiling too much about your first two books that are already out, Scottosaurus The Little Dinosaur and The Space Between Time, what are both of those books about?
The Scottosaurus book was a book that my that I wrote for our oldest nephew. His name is Scott. And he was 6 and he loved dinosaurs. And I was going through this intense time of uh, searching and deciding what I wanted my spiritual life to be like. And so I wrote this little story about a dinosaur named Scottosaurus who accidentally gets lost from separated from his family group. And so that's he has to keep trying to find them, and then of course in the end he does find them. So it's sort of an allegory for what I was going through. And my husband illustrated it. We gave it to him for Christmas or his birthday. I don't remember which. He was about 6 or 7 years old at the time. He's in his 40s now. And so when I wrote The Space Between Time, we decided to to publish it independently, but we used Scottosaurus as kind of our this is how you do this process kind of a book. And my husband had to reorganize it because it didn't have enough illustrations or something. Because, they have these set number of pages that the children's book is supposed to be. Fortunately, he's a graphic artist and he could do all that. And then The Space Between Time is a book that I actually started. I think I started it in 1999 or something like that. When we had my parents lived in the western side of Arizona. My husband and I live in the southeastern corner of Arizona. And my father had heart disease. And so we would go, 3, 4 times a year over to Quartzsite to see them. And this one time when I was there, I noticed that he was kind of starting to decline. He'd had heart surgery and he'd been taking medications and things for like 20 years at that point. And or close to it. And so I came home and I had this idea for a book about a father and a daughter because he was my mentor. And but then I started teaching full time, and when you're teaching full time, you don't have time for anything other than teaching. And so I set the book aside. Well, when I retired from teaching full time, I picked it up again. And of course, it's very different now than it was when I first started it. But I am a descendant of people who went to Oregon and Washington on the Oregon Trail. So that's part of the book. It's a 2 timeline book. And the woman in the past, Morgan, is the 3 times great grandmother of the woman Jenna in the present. And Jenna, at the beginning of the book, goes through this really traumatic week where her mother dies, her fiance ends their engagement, and she loses her job. So she goes home from Portland to Roseburg, Oregon, and she's cleaning out her mother's house and finds these journals that nobody's touched ever. And the minute she opens the first journal and starts reading, she enters her 3 times great grandmother's consciousness. So she gets to live life with her 3 times great grandmother. And when she comes back, no time has passed at all in her time. So she gets to do that periodically, and that kind of helps her deal with what she's going through in her life. So it's kind of interesting. Yeah, Morgan eventually starts to sense that there's somebody else with her and helping her too through her trials and tribulations. So The sequel, I'm working on the sequel now, so that's my
And
story.
speaking of your sequel, that sequel is going to be called Time's Echo. Without spoiling too much of it, what will it be about and when will it be published?
Well, I have no idea when it will be published because I am not a timeline. I don't do deadlines very well, but as soon as I finish the project that I'm working on now, which is converting all of my Story Power episodes for YouTube, I'm getting close to that. Then I will concentrate on the novel, and it's the rough draft is close to being finished, but it is Morgan in the past and Jenna in the present. Again, those two characters, and they are both involved in the women's movements of their time period. So I started the book right after I finished the rough draft of The Space Between Time. I started the second book. Now there was a lot of stuff for Morgan in the past to do because of, women trying to get the vote, but there was nothing for Jenna to do in 2014 until the Harvey Weinstein thing and the Me Too movement started. And so then I went back to the book and I could start writing Jenna's part of the book. So it's two timelines makes it, I had most of Morgan's stuff written, but I was just kind of waiting for something to happen so that I could write Jenna's timeline. So yeah, hopefully sometime this year we'll be ready. My husband does the cover for me. He does the layout. If I have maps or something, he creates those for me. Yeah.
You independently published both of your first two books, and did you use like a print on demand or self-publishing distributor or like KDP or something like that, or did you use a different platform?
Yeah, at the time when we started it, it was CreateSpace was the print on demand. Then, but CreateSpace it was affiliated with Amazon, but I think they changed it. I don't remember what year to KDP to Kindle Direct Publishing. So they CreateSpace went away and it became now it's I we didn't have to change our account or anything. Uh, so yes, the print on demand is through Amazon. We publish the ebook through Smashwords because Smashwords distributes to Apple, to Barnes and Noble, to lots of other ebook e-reader uh, platforms. And so it's available at Smash. Well, I think you can also get the ebook at Amazon, although we had to go to Amazon and upload it to them. They wouldn't accept the Smash word. I don't know why. But anyway, so my husband did all that for me. And then eventually, when I get a little bit of money, I'm going to have an audiobook done as well, which I don't know if I'll do it through Audible, but it will be available eventually.
Has your work as an educator influenced your writing, and if so, how?
Well, yes, in that when I lost my job teaching drama, somebody wanted my position, and so they maneuvered me out. I went to teach in Douglas, Arizona, which is a border town. And a lot of the students were of Mexican descent. So Spanish was their first language. And I had to teach them how to write an essay because they had to pass the test, so they could graduate. And what I realized was I'd written lots of essays because I had 4 degrees. And so I realized, oh, you know what? I know enough about writing that I can help the students learn to write a good essay. And I gave them kind of a framework for how to organize their essays. And once I realized that, I thought, oh, yeah, I had taken playwriting classes when I was getting my master's degree, but uh, I didn't really want to be a playwright. I liked the control of controlling the story, but playwriting is kind of a difficult uh, genre to write because it's all dialogue and you have to, condense everything and indicate body language and that kind of thing. So when I just sat down to write my novel, I pretty much started it with dialogue because that's what I'm used to in theater. And then I had to go back and add the description of what they were wearing and their facial expressions and their body language and where they were. And so it took me several years to learn how to do all of that. It took me about 7 years to write that first novel. And the second novel, even though I started it in 2014, I have not worked on it consistently. So, yeah, hopefully I'll be finished with it this year. It's easier now to incorporate all of that as I'm writing, not just write the dialogue and then go back and have to add all that stuff. So I did learn something writing my first novel, and I did learn something from teaching English. And of course, in my head, I have the body language because, as an actor, you have to kind of replicate that and the tone of voice and things. So, I have that in my head. So then it's easier to incorporate it in the novel.
What topics do you blog about at your blog, Sage Woman Chronicles?
Oh, well, anything. Anything that occurs to me, like my husband and I got COVID this year. I'd never had it before. So then my first time having COVID, I dodged it for 3 years. My husband, this is like the third time he's had it. And so, I was kind of like whining a little bit in my blog, and I said, January is my least favorite month, and that's how I started it. Now, and January actually is really my least favorite month of the year. Um, but I was kind of feeling that way this year because of COVID. And then I something I read, I get these newsletters about books, and this one newsletter has news about books and news about libraries and books that are banned and that kind of thing. And I saw this one little headline, and it said, Florida School District bans the dictionary. And I just started laughing. It was so hilarious. It's like, they banned the dictionary? What are they thinking? So I went and read that little article, and I ended my blog post about that. So sometimes it's about things that happen, out in the world, or like my mom's health is failing. Sometimes I'll write about my feelings about, her. My father died when he was 74, and it'll be 20 years this year since he's been gone. But my mom is 91, and she has a lot of health issues. And so sometimes I'll write about what I feel about that because I don't live close to her. I can't go see her, I can't drop everything and just go see her. Because she lives in the Pacific Northwest and I live in Southern Arizona. It's kind of far away. So, that sometimes I'll have an aha moment and I'll write about that. Or sometimes I write about the birds and the deer and the stuff in the backyard. You know, it's just anything that occurs to me.
Yeah, regarding that, I think it was the Escambria County, Florida school district. I might have mispronounced the name of that county a
Oh, no,
little bit.
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, banning the dictionary over a few words that might contain um, sexual content or whatever. That is just so stupid. I mean, what if a kid asks what a word in like a first grade book or whatever uh, means, and you don't have a dictionary to be able to answer the question?
Yeah, I know. Well, it said that they banned like seven different kinds of diction editions of dictionaries. So I think they have one or two dictionaries, but they also banned certain encyclopedia volumes. And it was like, oh, this is getting really ridiculous. That I don't know. As an educator, to me, information is not only uh knowledge is important, but it's power. It's it helps critical thinking. I mean, if we're not good at critical thinking, we are doomed as a species.
I'm going to move on to the next question. You host a podcast called Story Power, and there's a tilde in between the word story and power in the title of your podcast.
Mm-hmm.
What can listeners expect from a typical episode of your podcast?
I talk mostly to people about their creative process. I do also sometimes talk about to people who help people with their creative process. Like one of the episodes that I just converted not too long ago and uploaded, I was talking to a woman who works on Broadway, but she worked in PR and she worked, sometimes she would um, be like the assistant to the star. Like one of the stars that she was an assistant for was Denzel Washington while he was doing something on Broadway, because all of his staff and stuff was back in California. And, but she did PR and that kind of thing. She was working behind the scenes in Broadway. She wasn't on stage. And, so sometimes I talk to somebody who does voiceover work and narrates books and that kind of thing, or musicians or visual artists. So I just kind of go out looking for people who are creative or have a business that supports creative people. Mostly that's what it is right now. I'm a In July, I will be celebrating my 4-year anniversary, and I'm thinking about starting to look for people who have really interesting personal stories. Like, I found someone on YouTube and started following him who was an evangelical Christian and then studying the Bible and all the contradictions and things about the stories, especially in the New Testament, he decided that he just couldn't be a Christian anymore, at least not an evangelical Christian. And he talks to all these people who are biblical scholars who have decided the same thing. And I thought, now that's a really interesting story. So I'm going to see if I can get him to be a guest on Story Power because sometimes our personal stories are way more compelling than a fictional story. So, I'm going to look for people like that, or people who have YouTube channels that analyze, like there's a guy that analyzes The Wheel of Time, which is a series on, I think it's on Amazon, based on a whole series of like 14 or 15 books by uh, Jordan is his last name. I can't remember his first name. Robert Jordan, maybe. Anyway, and he just analyzes these stories and each episode so well. He notices all the little nuances in the television show. And I thought, I do that myself. So I want to talk to that guy and see how he got started doing that. And, so I'm going to expand a little bit my guests.
Okay, one final question. Other than yourself, who are some of your favorite authors?
Oh, well, I can't say that I'm that I would call myself my favorite author, but I love classical British literature. So Jane Austen is one of my all-time favorite authors. Um, George Eliot, I love her stuff, although I've only read like 3 or 4 of her books. Dickens, but I also love people who write like continuations of some of the Jane Austen stories. So recently I found this woman named Maria Grace. I just interviewed her for Story Power. And she has written this whole series of like 13 or 14 books about two of the main couples in Jane Austen, the Darcys and the Wentworths. And they live in a kind of altered reality where dragons are have relationships with humans, and they work together to make Britain safe and good, safe from the people who cannot hear dragons and cannot see dragons. And so they have this political alliance with the dragons, and there are dragons that are really, really small, like they're called fairy dragons, and they're about the size of hummingbirds, or they have really big dragons and everything in between. And so that's a really great series, the Jane Austen and Dragon series. But she also just started a new series that is called I think it's called the Writing Series, Wright, where the guild of these people do things like stonework or metal work, but they are connected to the elements of air and fire and earth and water. And so that's what their work is. They use their connections to repair things or to create things. And that's a really fun one. Let's see, who are some of my other? If I am reading nonfiction, I like Elizabeth Gilbert and Brene Brown. Although Elizabeth Gilbert, I have read 1 or 2 of uh, her novels. I love the Harry Potter series, the Hunger Games series, all of those kinds of things as well. So I have a wide range of things that I like.
Lucinda, thank you for appearing on Apollo Papyrus. It was wonderful for you to be the first guest
Oh,
under the Apollo Papyrus name.
yes. Well, thank you so much, Aaron. It was fun.
I've included links to Lucinda's books, blog, and podcast in the text description of this episode. As this podcast has a new name, I'm going to use a new tagline in my sign off going forward. This is Aaron Apollo Camp reminding you to write and read your passion. Bye for now. Remember to subscribe to the Apollo Papyrus YouTube channel at www.youtube.com/@ApolloPapyrus and the Apollo Papyrus Substack newsletter at apollopapyrus.substack.com. Y'all can visit the Apollo Papyrus website at campaaronapollo.wixsite.com/Apollo Papyrus and follow Apollo Papyrus on Threads, Instagram, Facebook, and Tumblr at Apollo Papyrus. Copyright 2024, Aaron Apollo Camp, all rights reserved. This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of our audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited, except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.